The Psychic type used to be the best type in Generation 1, but does it hold up in Generation 9? I'm trying to find out which is the best type to Nuzlocke Scarlet and Violet, and honestly, I think Psychic could be a contender. I'm a bit worried about their lacking defenses, which is never a good sign in a hardcore Nuzlocke since any Pokemon that faints has to be boxed forever, and I'm only allowed to capture one of each Psychic type I find. The first one conveniently being a guaranteed spawn just after the lighthouse. And already attempt 1 is in jeopardy since there's a 50% chance we'll have to reset. This is because Mars the Ralts has to be male, otherwise we immediately lose the run as soon as we reach Giacomo. He's a tough boss no matter what, but Psychic can't even hit Dark whatsoever. But we've got more immediate issues. The first challenge is beating Nemona so we can actually reach Mesagoza. And Ralts is a very weak Pokemon, but luckily there's only one more mandatory fight between now and the first gym, so we can afford to level all the way to the cap of 15 and pretty easily take Nemona down. Our next destination is Cortando, where we have a terrible matchup versus the weird bug lady. Listen, baking and bugs are not compatible, Katie. And just like scones, Psychic types don't go too well with bugs either. And with such low defense, we really don't want to have to take a hit. But you know what they say, the best defense is a good offense. So I go and pick up the strongest Pokemon I can get at this point in the game, Eevee. And to speed up evolving it, I head to Cascarafa to buy a Soothe Bell and start raising its happiness. Only problem being, I can't evolve it during nighttime. So as I wait for the endless day-night cycle of this game to change, I make sure to pick up some TMs we'll need in the future, and I even have time to tell you about this video's sponsor, REDMAGIC, a series of smartphones committed to providing players the ultimate gaming experience. And they just released their latest model, the REDMAGIC 9 Pro, an absolute beast of a gaming unit. And with the latest Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor, performance is 30% smoother than it's ever been before. To stress test it, I booted up Bloon's tower defense and spammed as many laggy towers I could get my hands on. But after several hours of desperately fishing for a lag spike, I failed and simply had an awesome time gaming. Playing Pokemon Unite feels even better than playing on the Switch, with awesome new 4D vibration for better immersion and perfect performance, which aside from the new processor is probably due to the REDMAGIC 9 Pro's crazy Ice 13 cooling system to reduce heat more than ever before, and the massive 16 gigabytes of RAM. That's like a little gaming computer that goes in your pocket. It's not that little though, with a 6.8-inch screen big enough to make gaming a great 120Hz experience, but still fitting comfortably in your pocket. With new multi-volume controls, you can listen to music while you game, so with 3 awesome designs to pick from, I truly recommend the REDMAGIC 9 Pro to anyone who wants to game on the go. And right now, REDMAGIC is celebrating their 6-year anniversary, so make sure to check out the link in the description for more information. Once the long-awaited dawn finally arrived, I could evolve Eevee into Espeon. And you're right for thinking that this doesn't actually give us any defensive advantage going into the fight versus Katie. But it's like I told you, the best defense is never having to take a hit at all, which is why I took that detour at night to pick up Power Gems, since hurling rocks at these poor critters at 80 base power wins us the fight without letting Katie make a single move. Next, we have to face the Stony Cliff Titan, which is why I went and picked up the Grass Knot TM. I also head back to Mesagoza to pick up a Miracle Seed to further boost our grass damage by 20%, and because Titan Cloth is the heaviest Pokemon in the game, a single Grass Knot nukes it out of orbit during the first phase, and only requiring 2 once it doubles its health during the second phase. So far, Espeon has been absolutely carrying, but to face Brassius's sturdy Sudowoodo, we're gonna need a better plan. Luckily, nearby Titan Cloth, there's some ruins where we can find Bronzor. The first one I run into, I of course make sure to capture, and I of course name it after the blue planet I guess that's unacceptable. It's not like I'm trying to name it Your Space. Welcome to the team, Urana 5. While Bronzor is an awesome Pokemon to pick up, we actually have a second mission here at the ruins, defeating Bronzors to pick up 10 Bronzor fragments. We then need to go capture a Charcadet, which can be easily done at around level 14, and then go speak to the man in Zapapico who wants 10 Bronzor fragments for an auspicious armor, which in turn allows us to already evolve Charcadet into Armarouge, which is a crazy Pokemon to have access to this early in the game. And as you might imagine, this makes facing Brassius a lot less intimidating. With instant access to Mystical Fire, his first 2 Pokemon get torched immediately. This leaves him with Sudowoodo, which can be a problem with Sturdy and the fact that it raises its speed with Trailblaze. However, Jupiter is fast enough that Sudowoodo wouldn't be faster even after a Trailblaze, so it just goes for Rock Throw, which can't take us out even with a critical hit, granting us a flawless, guaranteed victory. But this means we gotta prepare for our first Dark-type opponent, the Open Sky Titan. Yeah, that guy up there pooping the rock rocks. To be as thorough as possible, I needed to unlock High Jump, which requires you to beat the Titan Earthworm at level 29. But at level 20, this is completely feasible, especially with a really strong fire type like Jupiter, who I made sure to equip with a wide lens so that Will-O-Wisp would have an accuracy in the low 90s instead of 85%, which admittedly could still of course miss. Even so, with Armarouge's fantastic defense, it would take 4 headbutt flinches in a row for us to lose the fight. And while that's extremely unlikely since headbutt only flinches 30% of the time, it technically could happen, which means this isn't a guaranteed victory, and I'm just glad I live in the part of the multiverse where Earthworm didn't humiliate me into oblivion. I then used my newly acquired jumping abilities to pick up the TM for Rock Slide. And just nearby, there's a Dawnstone to be picked up, which means once Mars reaches the level cap of 20 and evolves into Kirlia, we can immediately use the Dawnstone to evolve into Gallade. I then go and pick up the TM for Charge Beam, and realize that the slight risk I took facing Earthworm was probably completely unnecessary, since Titan Bombardier doesn't actually have any damaging Dark-type moves. In fact, every single one of its attacking moves is ineffective against Steel, making this the perfect debut fight for Urina 5. It is still a Bronzor, meaning it doesn't have the greatest defenses yet, so we still take about a 6th from a Pluck. I then go for a super effective Charge Beam, which doesn't do too much damage, but with a special attack increase, we'll be doing more and more every single turn. I then make sure to alternate with Protect every other turn to make sure we get as much leftovers recovery as possible. The dangerous thing about this specific Titan fight is you have to fight both of the phases back to back without any healing in between. So it's important we try and preserve as much health as possible during the first phase, which I managed to Charge Beam my way through, leaving Urina 5 at just below half health. This is actually pretty decent going into the second phase, since this time we get help from Arven. And his Knackley is actually pretty good at damaging Bombardier whenever he decides to actually be useful. He also occasionally sponges some hits for us since Bombardier targets randomly. Knackley then continues being a worthless ally as I get in some more damage with Charge Beam. I then continue my protecting every other turn strategy, and Knackley decides to finally be useful, going for Smackdown. The fight only takes a few more turns once Knackley decides to be productive, even politely giving me the chance to get the KO with a final Charge Beam. Not the fastest of wins, but very consistent. This means we've reached Giacomo's Dark-type base, which in theory should be a massive roadblock for Psychic types. And it's why we needed Ralts to be male at the very start of the game, since we can't win with a Kirlia. It is a fairy type, but without access to Gardevoir at level 20, Kirlia just wouldn't cut it. The battle still requires a bit of strategy. First, we have to deal with his Poniard, which can be easily done with Jupiter. The only minor inconvenience here is that it's randomly raining in the overworld, meaning I can't one-shot it with a Mystical Fire. It also means I unfortunately activate Defiance by lowering its special attack, but even so, a critical hit couldn't take us out, so we're free to KO Poniard with a second Mystical Fire. Now we have to deal with the Starmobile that has Intimidate, which is the entire reason I sent in Jupiter first, so I can swap into Mars without having my attack dropped. The Starmobile then goes for Metal Sound, but with Gallade's massive special defense, it's more likely to go for Wicked Torque the next turn anyway, which actually does a ton of damage, and the only way Gallade is going to take enough hits to take the Starmobile out is by using Drain Punch, which heals us all the way back up to full, giving us a very straightforward way to defeat the Dark types. With an Electric type gym coming up, I head to the desert, where I meet this guy who's still in 8th grade after 20 years of school. Get going there, Lewis. But importantly, I can defeat him and 4 of his other reject friends to pick up the TM for Earthquake. The gym coming up is actually a bit worrisome, since Mismagius doesn't have any weaknesses once it terastalizes, and Ghost beats Psychic. But before we even get to take on her gym challenge, we're forced to face Nimona. The next time we face her, she'll have a fully evolved Meowscarada, which will be a disaster and a half. For this first fight, we can just take out Rockruff with a Drain Punch, Palmy with our newly acquired Earthquake, and her Florigato isn't that big a threat since her only Grass-type move at this point is Magical Leaf, which is special. This means even if she wastes a turn setting up with Honed Claws, it won't actually boost her Magical Leaf once she goes for it, giving us a free victory for now, meaning we're ready to take on the gym. Scarlet and Violet really don't have too many Psychic-type encounters, especially not the very good ones, so I really need to have a sound strategy before going into any battle. Here, Espeon gets another time to shine by taking out her lead Wattrel with a super effective Power Gem, which perfectly baits in Luxio since it has the super effective Bite. The reason I want this to happen is so it wastes its Intimidate against my special attacker that I have to switch out of anyway into Mars. Being Psychic Fighting, it's my only Pokemon that doesn't take super effective damage from Bite, and I can retaliate with an Earthquake to take Luxio out. Unfortunately, an Earthquake can't one-hit KO Bellibolt, and I can't risk getting either paralyzed by Spark or being taken too low so that a Hex would take me out. So I swap into Jupiter and go for Will-O-Wisp to encourage Bellibolt to go for Water Gun. This comes with a bit of risk since I have just enough HP to survive 2 Water Guns as long as neither of them crit. This is a big error on my part since it's so simple to EV train for 1 more point of HP so that I could have taken 1 crit. Either way, it works out since I don't end up getting punished by the Sentient Avocado, and I can swap back out into Mars since I know it's going to go for Water Gun. This one is a critical hit, so I'll take that as a bit of a warning. I then finish off Bellibolt with a Drain Punch to get back as much HP as possible, but we weren't actually ever in range to be taken out by 1 Hex. This means Mismagius is very likely to go for Confuse Ray. This is of course incredibly annoying and super inconsistent unless we equip Mars with a berry like Lum or Persim to get rid of the confusion. I make the most out of the free turn I'm given by going for Low Sweep, which lowers Mismagius' speed when it connects. This way, I'm simply faster the next turn and can take out Mismagius with a Sacred Sword, which actually leads us into one of the best matchups for our Psychic types in the entire game. And on the surface of things, we don't obviously have an advantage against Fire, except for the fact that Jupiter has the ability Flash Fire, which means it can't be hit by Fire-type moves whatsoever. This makes the fight extremely trivial. Torkoal's moveset consists of only 2 moves, Flame Wheel and Clear Smog, and because Mystical Fire lowers Torkoal's special attack whenever it connects, we're actually getting more health back from leftovers than it can deal damage by the time we defeat it. As for the Starmobile, the only move it can actually damage us with is Swift, which conveniently is also a special move that we can lower the power of with Mystical Fire, once again making it do less damage than we get health back from leftovers, so this fight is basically completely free. Not that I can say the same about Mela's range of motion. We similarly actually have a pretty good matchup versus Kofu. His Crabominable hits incredibly hard, which we definitely have to do something about. But first, we've got to deal with his Veluza, which despite looking like a pretty fast fish, is incredibly slow, and we can simply take it out with a Leaf Blade. We didn't even need the crit. Wugtrio comes in second, and because of Gallade's great special defense, I'm expecting it to go for Headbutt. And getting flinched here is actually kind of preferred, since it raises our speed through our Steadfast ability. This way, we can outspeed the next turn and go for a Protect just to get a little bit of health back from leftovers. Now that I'm faster, I don't have to worry about getting flinched from Headbutt and set up a Sunny Day before I get hit by its next move. I then Protect again to get as much health back as possible before I take Wugtrio out with a Leaf Blade. This just leaves Crabominable, but because we have the Sun up, it actually means Slam is his most powerful move. And even though Crabominable survives our non-crit Leaf Blade, a crit Slam wouldn't be enough to take Mars out, meaning with a bit of strategizing, we've once again guaranteed victory. This very conveniently raises the level cap to 33 right before we have to face Atticus, which is about as perfect as it gets since it's the exact level Bronzor evolves, and with a very defensive Pokemon that's immune to his main typing, you can kind of imagine how that fight went. This means our Fantastic Four are up against Larry, but he really isn't the issue. The real problem is the fact we have to face Nemona as soon as we defeat him without getting to heal in between. And at this point, she's got a fully evolved Meowscarada, which even without any Dark-type moves can 2-hit KO both Bronzong and Armarouge, and neither of them can one-shot Meowscarada unboosted. As for Larry, his first 2 Pokemon are very easily defeated with Gallade, and Bronzong resists both of Staraptor's moves, making it very easy to 2-hit KO with Body Press. As for Nemona, I desperately needed to find a way to defeat her Meowscarada without letting it hit me, because if it does, it's game over. I first have to take care of her Lycanroc, which does crit with a Bite, but I can get most of that health back by taking it out with a Drain Punch. She then sends in Goomy, which is an incredibly weak Pokemon, and I'm gonna abuse that fact to the fullest. I begin by setting up the Sun with Gallade, and I've made sure to give him a Heat Rock to extend the Sun turns. I then swap in Jupiter, who's been given an Assault Vest to tank these Dragon Pulses better. I then go for Flame Charge, and in my more recent Nuzlocks, I've added a rule where I'm not allowed to use stat boosting moves except ones that actually do damage like Flame Charge or Charge Beam. After a second Flame Charge, our speed is doubled, and we're now faster than Meowscarada. So from here, I first take out Goomy with a Psyshock and do the same to the incoming Palmo. This leaves her with the stupidly broken Furry Bait that I've so carefully made sure to outspeed and make sure we can get the one-hit KO by setting up the Sun. And it's in the moments like this that you obviously get a critical hit, never when you actually need them. Either way, I'm pretty happy our Fearsome Foursome has been able to make it this far unscathed. But with the next gym fight coming up being versus Rhyme's Ghosts, we're definitely gonna need some backup. And at this point in the game, there's only one normal type we can pick up, Girafarig. And in this generation, it's Actually a pretty awesome Pokemon since it can evolve into its new evolution, Farigiraf. And with a 5th member added to the team, we're ready to take on Rhyme in a double battle. I lead with Mars and Jupiter and start the first turn by protecting with Gallade. I really don't want him to hit Gallade, who's more frail on the physical side, but of course in going for Protect, they both target Armarouge. This does take Jupiter pretty low, but at least I can go for a Dark Pulse at the end of the turn to take Banette out. It's crucial to defeat one of her Pokemon here during the first turn. Not only does it pretty obviously move us towards our win condition, it also gives us an attack boost from the crowd. We get this boost as long as we knock out an opposing Pokemon, but so would Rhyme if she knocks us out. To make sure that doesn't happen to us the very next turn, I swap out of Jupiter and send in Saturn. This way I'm immune to Mimikyu's Shadow Sneak, and Mars can simply take out Houndstone with a +1 Night Slash. Rhyme then sends in her final Pokemon Toxtricity, and our Pokemon get a boost from the crowd. The next turn, Mimikyu goes for another Shadow Sneak, this time hitting Gallade. Saturn is Choice Scarfed, so it gets to go next and can take out Toxtricity even without the critical hit. Mars then at the end of the turn goes for a Night Slash to break Mimikyu's disguise. I then go for Protect, hoping to bait another Shadow Sneak, but Saturn moves next, meaning it didn't go for the priority move. Saturn takes a chunk out of Mimikyu with a Crunch and then takes a Soft Slash. Then to finish things off, I simply swap out a Gallade into Bronzong and take Mimikyu out with a final Crunch. Definitely a scary matchup, but we made it through the fight nicely. And with Rhyme defeated, this annoyingly means we once again have to take on Nemona before we're allowed to progress. The one good thing about this is her Sliggoo is still extremely exploitable, and we can pretty much use the exact same strategy of setting up the sun with Gallade and following that up with 2 flame charges from Armarouge to double our speed. This puts us in the exact same position as last time, forcing Nemona into a checkmate. Another thing I make sure to do before taking on the 7th gym is go fight the Great Tusk Titan. And just like Cloth, this thing is extremely heavy, leaving it open to obliteration by Grass Knot. I wish I could have a Slowpoke already too. Can't believe I'm jealous of these kids. I'm Miss Paldea. Speaking of which, who's this Tulip? No. There's only room for one beauty icon in this region, so this lady has gotta go down. Not only does she proclaim to be Paldea's top model, she also exclusively uses Psychic types. Does that description ring a bell? To prove that my Farigiraf is much better than hers, I gave it a Choice Scarf to guarantee that we outspeed and take it out with a second Crunch. She then sends in Gardevoir, which will never go for Shadow Ball because of Farigiraf's normal typing, so I can safely swap in Urina 5. I tank a pathetic Dazzling Gleam on the switch and then Protect to get some lefties back. It then just takes a couple of Gyro Balls to fell her improper Ralts evolution. With Gardevoir down, she sends in Espathra, which is a pretty big problem since this thing also has Shadow Ball. So I simply swap in Farigiraf again, who can't be hit by it. Espathra, being the speed demon that it is, outspeeds Farigiraf despite the Scarf and hits me with a Psychic. But it's resisted, so I deal a lot more damage back with a Crunch. The following turn, I take another Psychic, which doesn't even come close to being able to KO me even as a crit, allowing me to take out Espathra with yet another Crunch. Finally, she's left with Florges, so I swap out of Saturn and send in Urina 5. It hits me with a resisted Moonblast on the switch, but it doesn't do too much damage. After protecting to get some more health back, Florges blasts me with another Moon, basically just powering up my incoming payback to take out half of its health. The next turn, the exact same thing happens, and I gotta say, it feels good to get payback. And with this Pretender taken care of, there's only one more gym badge to collect. Against Grusha, we don't have to do anything extraordinary, and we could just send in Armarouge, but I decide to send in Mars first to set up the sun. This does give Frostmoth the chance to set up Tailwind, but once we swap in Armarouge, it burns the first turn of Tailwind with a Blizzard, and the second the following turn by hitting me with a Bug Buzz. But none of that really matters, since I then proceed to take out Frostmoth in a single hit with a Flame Charge, which also boosts my speed. Grusha sends in Beartic next, and even though Tailwind is still up, we're faster because of that Flame Charge, and I can simply take Beartic out with a Flamethrower. Satitan is a little bit more resilient. Even with the sun up, I'm not going to be able to one-hit KO it because of Thick Fat. Even so, there's no risk we get taken out by a super effective liquidation, so we can simply finish it off the following turn. Grusha's final Pokemon is conveniently terastalized into Ice, allowing us to hit it super effectively to take home the final gym badge. But before we can take on the Pokemon League, I round out my team by picking up an Espathra. With this thing, defeating Ortega is a piece of cake. It takes a couple of energy balls to get rid of Azumarill, and Darkspun and Wigglytuff both fall to Flash Cannons. As for the Fairy Squad Starmobile, I can simply swap to Urina 5, who can resist every single thing this can throw at me. This brings us to the final Team Star boss, Aerie, but with fighting types, we always had the advantage here. The simplest way to beat her, however, was a pretty interesting strategy, involving a allowing her to connect with a Sucker Punch the very first turn in order to go for a Flame Charge to boost my speed. I need one speed boost in order to outspeed Lucario and Passimian, but I also need to use Flame Charge first before setting up Psychic Terrain to not waste a turn of the terrain. I then go for Expanding Force, which is a Psychic type move that deals more damage in Psychic Terrain, but it also gets an extra boost from the terrain itself. Lucario isn't actually weak to Psychic, but we can simply take care of it with Flamethrower. Passimian, of course, also gets immediately destroyed by Expanding Force, but the reason I needed to set up Psychic Terrain is for her next Pokemon, Annihilate. This thing is surprisingly tanky, and it takes a lot of power to take it out in one hit. But with most of Aries' team defeated, she's only left with the Starmobile. And with how powerful Stab, Expanding Force, and Psychic Terrain is, it might even one-shot the Starmobile in this instance. But I decided to play it safe and send in Bronzong instead. This way is a lot slower than possibly just taking it out with Expanding Force, but it's incredibly consistent, letting me take out the Starmobile in just a few extra sensories. From here, there's only one more boss fight before the Elite Four. But at this point, you should have a pretty powerful team and access to most of the strategies in the game. I didn't even have a problem taking this thing out in my Fire-type run, so I'm convinced any type can deal with Dondozo easily. But while I'm in the area, I make sure to pick up our next encounter, a Slowbro. I also grab the Life Orb since it's basically right next to me. Yeah, sorry Hypno, you don't quite qualify for the team. With our biggest challenge yet ahead of us, we've got to make preparations. And to start, I pick up the TM for Stealth Rock. I then go pick up Hatena since it's the only fairy type we can get outside of Gardevoir. And from here, I've got to plan a strategy against each Elite Four member before we go in, because once we do, there's no going back. And for Rika, I'm gonna need a way to safely send in Mars and guarantee that he does enough damage. She leads the battle with Whiscash, which is a bit unfortunate since I plan to set up the Rain, and it's a water type. The awful thing about it knowing Muddy Water is that it can lower your accuracy, which for your Rain of 5 makes no difference at all since Stealth Rock always connects. On the second turn, Whiscash actually gets the accuracy drop, but it still doesn't matter since we're just here to set up Rain Dance. Unfortunately, this does mean we're going to be taking double damage as we swap in Mars. I've also made sure to give him a White Herb just in case our accuracy gets dropped, since that would ruin the rest of the fight. It ends up not even being an issue, and a quad-effective Leaf Blade takes Whiscash out. Camerupt comes in second, but gets taken out instantly by a quad-effective Aqua Cutter. In this case, we definitely didn't need the Rain, but for the next Pokemon, we certainly do. Domfan is the reason for both Stealth Rock and setting up the Rain. With Stealth Rock, we can break it sturdy, and Aqua Cutter does enough in the Rain to take Domfan out even if we don't land a critical hit. Of course we do, making most of my preparation meaningless, but nevertheless she sends in Dugtrio. Not only is Dugtrio faster and could take Gallade out with a critical hit Earthquake, it could also set up Sandstorm, which would raise its evasion and make the fight extremely annoying. And while there's nothing I can do to stop that, at least I can send in my tankiest Pokemon, Neptune, to be able to take a few hits in case I miss. Neptune of course hits the first Surf, but you can never be too careful. Finally, she's got Clodsire, but with a physical moveset, she basically can't touch us, and it's a free victory. Poppy's got Steel types, and they resist Psychic, so we've got to find a way to take them down. And the plan here is to use a pretty similar strategy as we used against Rika. I begin by setting up Stealth Rocks to deal with Magnezone Sturdy, and Caparajah just copies me. But this time, instead of a Damp Rock, Urina 5 is holding a Heat Rock and sets up the Sun. Levitate is by far Bronzong's best ability, and in this case, it works out really smoothly since I can swap in Armarouge without fearing it going for high horsepower. I did a lot of planning before taking on Rika, and I really wanted to come up with a strategy where Armarouge could raise its speed with Flame Charge, but after a while, I realized that I really don't have to. With the Sun up, every single one of our Pokemon falls to a single Flamethrower, except for Magnezone because of Sturdy. That's of course why we set up the rocks, so that we could take Magnezone out in one hit without it setting up Light Screen. What I failed to consider when wanting to set up with Flame Charge is that we don't actually have to defeat Tinkaton with Armarouge. Instead of coming up with a complicated strategy to try and raise Armarouge's speed, it's way simpler to just send in Neptune. Tinkaton's attack isn't even that crazy, so these hits are doing basically nothing. Even a critical hit Terra-boosted Gigaton Hammer barely does a quarter. On top of that, Neptune even gets access to Flamethrower, which I can use the last turn of Sun. This takes Tinkaton low enough that a second Flamethrower finishes the job, which means we face Larry, who's actually a much bigger threat than both the previous Elite Four members. His only fatal flaw is we can very easily exploit his lead Tropius. This thing almost always sets up the sun the first turn to double its speed with chlorophyll, so I go for a flame charge which boosts my speed high enough that I'm actually faster even after the chlorophyll boost. So not only did I get to boost my speed for free, Tropius just doubled my firepower. This is going to come in very handy since his next Pokemon Staraptor would be faster than me if I hadn't gotten that speed boost, but in the sun, I can simply take it out with another flamethrower. He tries his luck with Oricorio next, but it's not only slower than Staraptor, it has weaker defenses, so it's also disposed of easily. Altaria comes in a turn before the sun's about to disappear, but because it's a dragon type with high special defense, I instead go for Psyshock, hitting it on the physical side, which does just under half. I also gave Jupiter the Assault Vest, so that Dragon Pulse barely touched him. A second Psyshock then takes out Altaria, and Larry's left with his final Pokemon, Flamigo. Without the sun, I'm unsure if Jupiter can one-shot, so I swap out into Neptune expecting a liquidation, but Flamigo goes for Brave Bird. And despite Neptune's massive defense, it still does a heck of a lot. It looks like I can still tank a crit, so I stay in for the next one, dealing a lot of recoil damage to Flamigo. I then try firing off an Ice Beam that just barely falls short of taking Flamigo out. At this point, I know I can't take a critical hit, so I swap out a Neptune into Urana 5. This turn it oddly goes for liquidation, since that would have barely done anything against Neptune, but then follows that up with a powerful close combat the following turn, giving Urana 5 the final KO with a Charge Beam. The Dragon Master Hassel has a lot of hard-hitting Pokemon, and most of my team can't afford getting hit by them, so it's gonna be Venus's time to shine. With enough EVs, we're just barely faster than Noivern, and we can take it out with a Life Orb boosted Dazzling Gleam. Hassel then sends in Haxorus, and this thing has Crunch, so we really can't afford to let this thing hit us. Fortunately, just like Noivern, it also falls to a Life Orb boosted Dazzling Gleam. This brings in Dragalge with its colossal special defense, so we really can't stay in with Venus here, swapping out into Mars. I do get hit with a Sludge Bomb on the switch, and it wouldn't be my luck if I didn't get poisoned. Gallade then attacks on the physical side where Dragalge is weak, taking it out with a single Earthquake. Before we face Hassel's ace, he still has Flapple, and in what seems like a very strange decision, I decide to swap out into Neptune since I'm expecting it to go for Aerial Ace. It ends up being Dragon Rush, but I actually want it to go for Seed Bomb the following turn. I know I can survive it no matter what, and Ice Beam is my best option to take Flapple out. And with that, he's only got Baxcalibur left. He won't go for Icicle Crash or Brick Break since they're both resisted, so I can pretty safely send in Haley against a Glaive Rush. Baxcalibur goes for Icicle Crash the next turn, and I do have a Focus Sash just in case, but it doesn't do nearly as much as I expected. Unfortunately, my Dazzling Gleam isn't enough to take Baxcalibur out, so I've got to fall back on plan B, Urana 5. Bronzong resists everything but Brick Break, which isn't even Stab, so I can pretty confidently grab the win with a Gyro Ball. By this point, my Psychic types had made it all the way to the champion without losing a single teammate. And honestly, without too much resistance, given the right strategy. And being so close to becoming champion, I was determined to have things stay that way. Geeta doesn't exactly have Cynthia's reputation. She's not famous for being particularly formidable, and to be honest, her team is pretty confusing and seems like a bit of an afterthought. I know Gallade can't get one-shot by Espathra, so I equip it with a Choice Scarf to make sure that we're faster. This way, I only have to take the one hit I'm guaranteed to survive and can take out Espathra with another Night Slash the following turn. And because Gallade is weak to Play Rough, I'm expecting Geeta to send in Go-Goat. Not exactly what I think of as a champion Pokemon, but Geeta seems to think it's goated. Very predictably, she goes for that Play Rough, which barely does anything against Armarouge. I then have Jupiter set up his own Sun for once, as the Go-Goat just goes for a Bulk Up to set up its attack and defense. Not that it's going to need any of that once I torch it with a Flamethrower. I realized pretty quickly during the planning for this run that Armarouge is pretty busted and kind of destroys half this game, and Geeta is no exception. Half of her team is weak to fire, so Avila gets completely destroyed. She sends in King Gambit next because she thinks it has a chance with its Dark typing, but in this case that doesn't make much of a difference since it's part steel and slower than the first act of Star Wars A New Hope. Geeta then does what I was hoping she would do as soon as I took out Go-Goat, which is send in Veluza. My hope was that Veluza would go for Aqua Jet to activate my Absorb Bulb. That would make my Dark Pulse a one-hit KO, but instead Veluza opts for Liquidation just to get some more damage, but in the sun it barely does anything, but it does activate my Absorb Bulb, which at this point doesn't actually make a difference. Not that it ever really did, since we could defeat the rest of her team without the boost very easily. My initial initial plan was to try and also get a speed boost with Flame Charge somewhere along the way as we face Glimmora so that we'd be able to outspeed. Instead, I swapped to Mars since Glimmora only has special attacks and tank and earth power. Then with my Choice Scarf, I'm able to outspeed, and because Glimmora got rid of its poison typing when it terastalized, I can easily knock it out with a single close combat. I honestly don't think this was a pathetic display from Geeta as much as it shows how powerful psychic types actually are. However, our psychic types still have a ways to go, and some of the most difficult fights in the game ahead of them. The first of which being what I consider the true champion of the game, Nemona. Although for my usual strategy to work against her, it can't be raining. The last generation was supposed to be based on the UK. Luckily for me, you can reset the weather by just resetting the game. This time Nemona is at her full potential, and once again, we can't let her crazy kitty go wild. Instead of leading with Mars, I go for Venus, who can actually outspeed Lycanroc and take it out with a flash cannon. And next I was really expecting Nemona to send in Goodra, but instead she sends in Pawmot, which I can just tear apart with a stab psychic. Not exactly sure what she was thinking there, but Pawmot's a really nice Pokemon to get out of the way. Third is her Dunsparce, so I swap out into Mars as it sets up a coil. The worst thing Dunsparce could have done is Hyper Drill, which wouldn't have taken Mars out even with a crit. And despite the +1 to defense from coil, a stab close combat is still enough to take the Dunsparce out. The downside is of course the close combat lowers both of my defenses, so as Nemona sends in Orthworm, I swap out of Mars into Neptune. Orthworm only has physical moves, none of which are super effective against Neptune. Sure, she manages to get a defense drop with Iron Tail, but her Earthquake the next turn deals some pathetic damage anyway. And because Orthworm's special defense is so terrible, it practically melts at the idea of a flamethrower. Finally, we've made it to Goodra, and it's gonna be more difficult than ever to try and set up against this thing. Instead of Gallade's job, this time it'll be Urana 5's. It starts by hitting me with Muddy Water, which fortunately doesn't get the accuracy drop, so I can set up a light screen to reduce further damage. It does unfortunately drop my accuracy on the second hit, but this time it does substantially less damage, and I connect with my Earthquake anyway to take it down low. At such low health, I can finally start thinking about setting up the Sun so that we have as many Sun turns as possible when I send in Armarouge. Because Light Screen is no longer in effect, we of course have an Assault Vest to reduce any damage we might take. And just like before, we'll need 2 Flame Charges in order to outspeed Meowscarada. One of the best things about the Sun here is it discourages Goodra from going for Muddy Water, which could lower our accuracy. We don't want to be in a situation facing Meowscarada where we might miss. As I'd hoped, we take out Goodra with the second Flame Charge, leading her to send in Meowscarada. But it's too little too late. With our 2 Flame Charges, Jupiter outspeeds, and with a final Armor Cannon, we defeat Nemona for the last time. But even defeating one of the strongest trainers in the game, we've only just completed one of the 3 main stories, the Victory Road. And because defeating Nemona spawns you inside of the Academy, as soon as we step outside, we have to be prepared to face Director Clavel. Depending on your typing, Clavel can be a really difficult opponent. But in our case, it's actually not that bad. The biggest problems are Poltegeist and Houndoom, and only the latter is really that big an issue. Because taking out Oranguru with Mars instantly baits in the Poltegeist. And because Mars is faster, and Poltegeist barely has any physical defense, it just gets one-shot by a Night Slash. Amoonguss is next, but it gets completely walled by Bronzong, which can take it out with a couple of extra sensories. Understandably, Clavel sends in Houndoom, but at this HP range, it can only one-hit KO me with Fire Blast, which is perfect since it gives us a free switch to Jupiter. Because of Flash Fire, we actually don't take any damage at all. Jupiter then outspeeds, but I know I can't take out Houndoom with a single Aura Sphere, so I've equipped him with an Assault Vest to be able to tank the Dark Pulse better and guarantee we don't go down to a crit. A second Aura Sphere then blasts the Demon Doggo out of existence, and would you believe me when I tell you a 120 base power stab fire move takes out Abomasnow in one hit? Clavel is then just left with Quackable, but it only has physical moves and nothing that hits Neptune super effectively. Clavel's Dancing Duck then goes for Aqua Step to raise its speed, you know, just to make sure it outspeeds Slowbro. The fact of the matter is this duck only has resisted moves, so Terra boosted Aqua Step is probably its best option. Ironically, the duck actually does less damage than the Rocky Helmet does back every time it hits me. It's also not that big a problem to forgo leftovers since we can just heal up with Slack Off anytime we take any damage. Basically what I'm trying to tell you is this is a unlosable matchup, and once Quackable gets low enough, I put it out of its misery with a Surf. This means we've got to take on Penny, but the only Pokemon we actually need to worry about is her Sylveon that knows Shadow Ball. And the simple answer to that problem was just setting up a Light Screen versus Leafeon beforehand so that we take very little damage and then go for Heavy Slam a couple of times. And that means the only person standing between us and taking on Professor Sada is her son. But his team doesn't actually do too well against Psychic types except his Dark type Mabostiff. But because it's just one difficult Pokemon, we can easily get around it by just giving Venus a Focus Sash, swapping into a Crunch and surviving on 1 HP to then take out Mabostiff's remaining health the following turn. And with that, our team is ready to head on to Area 0. And here we could technically capture a Screamtail, but the Psychic types we already have are much better. But Robomami here is no joke, with her Ace being one of the most terrifying Dark types of all time, and having the infamous Fluttermane with Shadow Ball, we could be in big trouble. Once you reach the final fight of a Nuzlocke, it's like war and love. There aren't any rules. Losing a Pokemon is the most costly thing that can happen in a run, but in the final fight, it doesn't really matter since there aren't any more fights coming up. But I'd grown so attached to my team at this point, I didn't want to see any one of them fall. With every battle that had come before, I'd tried to foresee what was to come, and so I came up with one final strategy. To start us off, Mars is once again holding a Choice Scarf to outspeed Slitherwing and take it out with a quad-effective Aerial Ace. Screamtail comes in second, and even though this thing's attack isn't anything to write home about, neither is Gallade's physical defense, so I swap out into Neptune. I end up dodging the Play Rough on the switch, but I kinda wanted it to connect since Neptune is still rocking the Rocky helmet. This way I can get consistent damage every turn since Screamtail only has physical contact moves. Then once Screamtail finally knocks itself out, it'll be like nothing ever happened since I can heal all the way back up to full with Slack Off. Fluttermane comes in next, and we want to be at full health, so it goes for Shadow Ball instead of Thunderbolt. This way we can score a free switch as we swap into Assault Vest for Rigorap. There is just one problem with this strategy, and it's that Fluttermane wants to go for Thunderbolt, which ends up getting a paralysis. I even get fully paralyzed. This is bad since one more full paralysis means I either have to switch or let Saturn go down. In fact, after the next hit, I connect with my Crunch, but then I need to make a choice. I stay in and risk the crit, but I'm even risking getting fully paralyzed, but Saturn pulls through, taking out one of the biggest threats to our team. With half of her team now defeated, Sada sends in Brute Bonnet. I obviously can't stay in since Saturn goes down to any move, so I swap out into Mars, who's got to take a payback on the switch. I then also take a ton of damage from the Sucker Punch the following turn, but in the end it's all worth it since we can fire off a quad effective X-Scissor and take out Brute Bonnet in one hit. Sada now only has 2 Pokemon left as she sends in Sandy Shocks, but the battle is still far from over and I really don't want to lose one of my Psychic types. I swap in Urana 5 against the incoming Earth Power to dodge it with Levitate. Sandy Shocks then goes for Discharge and I've got one chance to maybe get through this deathless. I set up with Light Screen to try and take a little bit less damage, and I even managed to avoid paralysis from the next discharge, allowing me to hit it with an Earthquake. With Sandy Shocks at about half, I now just need to fulfill the plan. The next discharge does paralyze, which I really wanted to try and avoid, so I equipped Urana 5 with a Cherry Berry to get rid of it, but we missed the Hypnosis. It's not a very accurate move, but if we can put Sandy Shocks to sleep at the end of the turn, we'll get a free switch. And by Arceus, Urana 5 manages to do it. Putting Sandy Shocks to sleep at the end of the turn means it's guaranteed to be asleep the turn we swap in Venus. And because we got that damage with Earthquake, we can do just enough to guarantee the KO. And so I'd made it all the way to the final Pokemon of the final boss. One of the most devastating Dark types to have ever been conceived, it's Roaring Moon. As soon as it comes in, its booster energy activates, triggering its Protosynthesis ability to raise its attack. But it doesn't matter, we're gonna outspeed, and a quad effective Dazzling Gleam isn't quite enough. Of course I knew that was going to happen. This was all part of the plan. The whole point of switching in Venus for free was to preserve the Focus Sash for this exact situation. And so I'd done it. I'd beat a Pokemon Scarlet Hardcore Nuzlocke using only Psychic types. And whether or not it's the best type in Scarlet and Violet remains to be seen. I think Steel could still be better, but Psychic certainly made the case for itself. As for things I'd do differently, there were a lot of strategies like the Hypnosis one at the end that were a little bit iffy, and taking on Earthworm early ended up being completely unnecessary, so doing it at the right level cap would have just been free and a lot safer. I think Psychic types are good enough that you could technically plan around every single situation no matter what. But let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and of course subscribe.